What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. In this video today we're going to be looking at a different kind of sorcerer than what is the meta right now. Of course, ball lightning sorcerer is ridiculously efficient and fantastically good in season 2 of Diablo 4, but it might be that you are looking for something a little bit different, or maybe you're tired of playing ball lightning, and I want to present you with an option that is equally as good at cleaning up maps just as fast while also dishing out massive AoEs and being really good at boss DPS as well. This build focuses on Blizzard and it absolutely rocks. Originally, when I started this out in my journey from 1 to 50 with the sorcerer, the idea was that I wanted to use something that incorporated 2 hydras in Blizzard and basically created this fire and ice kind of situation where you use the hydras to essentially set things on fire, and then you would use the blizzards to lock down a certain area, thereby using these two to create choke points on the map, which I thought would be really good in nightmare dungeons, you know, tier 100s or whatever. As I started progressing into the late game, the unfortunate thing was that I realized that Hydra was underperforming and it was the weakest part of the build. And I kind of like redesigned it around level 75, level 80 to really focus deep into Blizzard. What that did is it kind of like helped me free up some of the aspects that I was using in the build to also try and make Hydra work. And it made the build a lot more laser focused towards making Blizzard, you know, shine and making it be as efficient and lethal as possible. Now, those of you that know my builds know that the idea that I always work with is I want to make something that is a Swiss Army knife that is equally good at doing tier 100 nightmare dungeons, doing Duriel, doing Uber Lilith, pretty much any content that the game throws at you. I want you to be able to do that with this build without having to change a single aspect, a single paragon point, a single talent skill point, or to, you know, shuffle your items around or anything like that. And that is basically what we're looking at here. So as you can see in the background footage, this build is capable of essentially doing every single bit of content that is available to us right now in the game. And with the abattoir coming out soon as well, this will probably be also fairly decent at that, simply because this is really good at fast clears, covering entire areas with Blizzard, and essentially surviving anything that makes it through that through the use of really good cooldowns that protect us and essentially make us invulnerable. So firstly, before we get started, just 2 things I want to just mention. Firstly, there is a link to a d4builds.gg build sheet in the description of this video for the sake of brevity. If you don't want to listen to everything that I have to say and you just want the details, then you can of course click on that and it's going to show you everything that we're about to go through, the paragon points, where they need to be. It'll show you the skills to use, it'll show you the gear and all of that. So go on and use that if you want a TLDR. Secondly, this is a build that utilizes 5 uniques, and I know that that might be a little bit hectic for someone who's just trying to build this from scratch. I understand that. We are starting to go into like the back part of season 2, and that's why this build was relatively easy for me to slap together, because I was playing my second sorcerer up to a level 100. So I recognize the fact that I might have some gear on the sorcerer that is, you know, obviously, you know, not farmed yet by someone who's just trying to build it out, and I will try to suggest some alternatives here. But bottom line is, if you want this build to perform the way that you've seen at the beginning of this video, then obviously the idea would be to try and get as close as possible to what I'm about to show you here in detail. But first things first, let's just talk skills. We are using Frost Nova, we're using Flame Shield, we're using Blizzard, of course, we're using Ice Armor, we're using Lightning Spear, and we're using Teleport. Now, the reason why we have such a wide selection of elements here is will make a little bit more sense once we actually get into the gear a little bit deeper, but we're also trying to use as many defensive cooldowns as possible for this build, which allows you to survive, you know, any kinds of issues that you might run into with tough enemies that are taking a little bit of time for your Blizzard to kill them. So first things first, Frost Nova, of course, is a great way for us to essentially just freeze the combat and also just, you know, get out of trouble. It also allows us to introduce vulnerable to enemies, which is great. Flame Shield is just fantastic because it makes us immune and gives us a way to essentially activate Tibalts. And it also gives us a fat amount of mana reduction once it is active. Blizzard is of course the star of the build, and we're going to try and load as many things onto this Blizzard as we possibly can to make it deal as much damage as possible, but we also want to give it some lucky hit chance, as you can see here, and we also want to just push the mana cost down as much as possible so we can get as many casts out of our mana pool in one go as we can. Ice armor is also fantastic here because it's a way for us to activate barrier, and it's another way for us to give ourselves a hell of a lot of mana regeneration. Lightning spear is an additional way for us to introduce lightning onto enemies. Of course, there are other ways that this build can do it as well, but we are trying to load as many elements onto our enemies as we can so we can benefit from the class ring, which is also something that we use on this build. Last but not least, teleport is a fantastic way for us to also be able to just move around the map super fast. It's another way to introduce lightning onto enemies, and it's also a way for us to essentially activate some of our items and basically, you know, just mess with enemies on the battlefield. Our enchantment slots are Chain Lightning and Firebolt. The reason why we use Chain Lightning is, as mentioned, we want some ways to introduce additional elements. We've got an easy way to put you know, frost or ice onto enemies because we're using Blizzard. We've got an easy way to put fire onto enemies because we're using Firebolt enchantment, which means that whenever we hit enemies with our skills directly, they are burning as well, which that's our access to fire. We now have Chain Lightning, which fires out every 100 mana and basically introduces lightning into the mix. Of course, Lightning Spear also does this for us. And of course, if you teleport onto a bunch of enemies, you're also causing lightning damage to them. So that's another way. So we have 3 ways of introducing lightning. So then the skill tree first, and I'm going to go through this quite fast. Of course, remember that d4builds.gg link is there for you with all the detail inside as well. So we're going to put 1 point into Firebolt and 1 into Enhanced Firebolt. You can put 2 points into Firebolt as well if you want, but we need to put 2 to move on to the core skills tree. And also we need Firebolt because we want to use it in our enchantment slot. So then moving on over to our core skill area here, we are putting 1 point into Chain Lightning because we want to use it in our enchantment slot, and we're putting 1 point into Devastation to give us 3 more mana, and then we're putting 3 points into Elemental Dominance, which gives us more mastery skill damage as long as we cast it above 50 mana. Blizzard is of course a mastery skill, and that's why we pick it up. Then moving us over to the defensive skills, here we pick up all the usuals. So we have Flame Shield with a point in Enhanced and a point in Mystical, giving us some nice mana cost reduction when it's active. We have Teleport, just 1 point in it, giving us the effect of being able to move around with it quite fast. We have Ice Armor and 1 point into Enhanced Ice Armor, also giving us some fantastic mana regeneration. And we've got Frost Nova, going all the way past Enhanced Frost Nova and onto Mystical Frost Nova, giving us a way to introduce Vulnerable onto the enemies that we hit with it. We also put 1 point into Elemental Attunement, just giving us a chance on lucky hits to get some defensive skills back. We stack a lot of lucky hit with this build, and we have over 50% chance with Blizzard, so you get these defensive skills back quite regularly. And then we put 3 points into Glass Cannon, giving us 30% more damage, but also meaning that we take 15% more. At the beginning, if you are struggling with taking too much damage while trying to build this, you might want to peel back these 3 points and only introduce them once you feel more comfortable playing it and once you can take a little bit more punishment. That brings us on to the conjuration portion here, and over here we pick up Lightning Spear and we draw all the way past Enhanced to Invoked. Basically what this means is that your Lightning Spear, whenever it crits, it will stun enemies, and this is another way for you to basically CC on the battlefield, which is really good. We do put 2 points into Precision Magic, giving us 10% additional lucky hit chance. Now, if you stack more lucky hit than I do on your gear, then obviously you can use these 2 points somewhere else. But it's important to try and get your lucky hit on the Blizzard as high as possible. And the sweet spot kind of like sits around 50 to 55% where it performs very, very well. We put a point into Align the Elements here, giving us some nice DR against elites. And we put 3 points into Mana Shield for some good old-fashioned damage reduction. And we put 3 points into Protection, meaning that we have barriers every time we use a cooldown. Our bar is filled with cooldowns, so we pretty much get barriers up all the time. So it's just really, really good defensively for us. That brings us to the Mastery skill tab and basically the star of the build. So of course we have Blizzard here, which we pump 5 points into it. We pick up Enhanced Blizzard, and we also get Mage's Blizzard, which just means that if you're casting this above 50 mana, you get a nice 4% increase to the duration of the Blizzard. We do get 1 point into Inner Flames here, and we put 3 points into Devouring Blaze, which says that you have increased critical strike damage against burning enemies, and if they're also immobilized, this bonus is essentially doubled. This synergizes incredibly well with the amount of freezing and everything that we do with this build, and this is a phenomenal way for us to just get a lot more damage out of our synergies. Of course, enemies are burning all the time because we have Firebolt in our enchantment slot, which means as soon as we deal damage to enemies, then they burn. We move on over to the ultimate tab here. Unfortunately, sad, we don't pick up any ultimates, but we do get 3 points in Permafrost, 3 points in Hoarfrost, 3 points in Icy Touch, and then lastly 2 points in Frigid Breeze. Those first 3 over here just basically enhance our damage profile, and Frigid Breeze on Lucky Hit again just gives us another chance to essentially get more mana back. We're trying to just double, triple, quadruple dip in as many different ways of getting as much mana back as possible. Blizzard is slightly expensive, but once you start making it a little bit more appealing by, you know, reducing its mana cost, you can actually get it to about 20-25, which is a lot more palatable than the 40 that it starts at, but you still want to be able to get as much mana back as fast as possible so you can just keep on pushing these blizzards out, because more blizzards mean more pain and more death. We also put 3 points into Fury Surge here, again just helping us with mana with this build. What Fury Surge does is as you kill a burning enemy, it increases your mana regeneration by 45% for 3 seconds. As long as you are in combat, especially in Nightmare Dungeons and stuff like that, this is just going to be firing off the entire time, and you're going to have this increased mana generation uptime the entire time. In our key passives, we pick up Avalanche, and what Avalanche once again does is works off of Lucky Hit, and every time, well, not every time, but 10% of the time, if it was every time, Jesus, 10% of the chance to give you essentially a free blizzard that deals 40% more damage. Now this chance, this 10%, is doubled against vulnerable enemies, and this build excels at making enemies vulnerable, so this is just really, really good and enhances our damage profile so well. As for the Paragon board, I'm actually really just going to breeze through this. Of course, again, the d4builds.gg link is there for you to look at, but for the sake of trying to keep this video as short as possible and not have you sit here for 45 minutes, I will just mention exactly which boards we're picking up and which order that we're picking them up, as well as which glyphs we're putting onto those boards and the reason for those glyphs, of course. So the starter board is exactly that, the starter board, and so we'll just breeze through that. In the starter board, we throw in Elementalist. This is just a great way for us to squeeze additional damage out of those elements that we're stacking onto it, and we kind of like just get through this board picking up equally offensive options as well as defensive options. Our second board that we move on to is Enchantment Master. We don't actually go for the legendary node, of course, but we go on and drop Reinforced in here, which double dips quite nicely into these rare nodes over here and gives us a bunch of additional non-physical damage, aka magic damage, some additional resistance to elements, and some additional intelligence. Our third board that we pick up is Burning Instinct. Once again, not actually going for the legendary node, but dropping Destruction on you. Now, we focus a lot on enhancing Destruction as much as possible, and what that does is it gives us a huge amount of critical strike damage, almost 200%. So a large portion of our DPS actually comes from this particular board, and as long as we are stacking a lot of critical strike chance, then you're going to be seeing some really, really big numbers rolling off of those blizzards, or more specifically the ice shards that form within those blizzards. Our fourth board that we pick up is Icefall, and here we actually do pick up the legendary node, but we also drop Staglamite in here, and this enhances our Ice Spike skill damage, which I was just referring to, and it also gives our Ice Spikes a nice 10% critical strike chance increase, which is just phenomenal. Last but certainly not least, we move on to our fifth, let me just, before I lie to you, 1 2 3 4 5 board, and this one is Frigid Fate, where we do pick up the legendary node as well, but we also drop Adept in here. So Adept is all about making your mastery skills better, and of course Blizzard is a mastery skill, so what this does is it gives us a crap load of additional mastery skill damage. Since the star of this build is Blizzard, we want that. and it also increases the area that the Blizzard covers by 20%, which is nice. Now generally Blizzard is chunky enough and you can kind of like just plop it down over a boss, but having this 20% increase means that you hardly ever miss, and even if the boss kind of like fucks around and moves around, the Blizzard's still gonna hit them no matter where they move. So quickly running us through our gear choices here. Firstly, we have Disobedience on our helm here, which is just giving us more, you know, defensibility. We want maximum mana on our helm, and we want cooldown reduction on our helm. A total armor combined with Disobedience on here is really, really good because it's just going to make us really, really tanky. And then in our chest slot, we are using Raiment of the Infinite. This makes our teleport have that nice suck effect and essentially brings all the enemies together and stuns them, so just really, really good. Bear in mind that Raiment of the Infinite does give you 2 additional points into Glass Cannon, which is going to make you take more damage. That means you'll have 5 if you put the other 3 points that I suggested in there as well, so you're going to need to be able to deal with that additional damage that's coming in. On our gloves, we put our Frozen Tundra aspect on here, and what this does is it says that while Deep Freeze is active, exploding ice spikes form on the area, dealing cold damage. So this portion of the aspect is not working because we're not using Deep Freeze, but the portion that we are interested in is your ice spikes have a 50% increased explosion radius, which you do benefit from, you know, on all of your ice spikes, so you don't have to be using Deep Freeze. So yes, we don't have the first part, but the second part is important. On our gloves, there are some very important stats that we want on here. We want attack speed on here, we want critical strike chance on here, we want lucky hit chance on here, and we want lucky hit chance to restore a primary resource. These are really, really good. Your glove is probably one of the most important slots on your character for a build like this, so you're looking for something that's kind of like close to what I have here. As you can see, this is even like a low item power roll, but it's just so good that, you know, I haven't found anything better than this so far. On our pants, we are using Tibalts, and Tibalts is really, really good for ramping up damage. And we need to be able to access that you know, ramp effect by becoming unstoppable, and of course that is where we have Flame Shield, which gives us the ability to access this whenever we use Flame Shield. So you use Flame Shield defensively in this build, but you also use it offensively to enable Tibalts and just get that massive damage boost there. We use Isu's Heirloom in our boot slot here because this gives us the ability to get some additional critical strike chance that we might not be getting from the rest of our gear. In my case, it takes me from about 34% critical strike chance all the way to 50, which is fucking delicious. So I absolutely recommend this boot to kind of help you with that sort of situation. The benefit that we have here is this also rolls with critical strike damage and mana cost reduction. You wanted mana cost reduction on the boot in any case, so it's good shit. We're using the wand and focus setup with this. So on our wand here, we have Glacial as an aspect, which is our second ice spike aspect. This one actually works off of Blizzard, so it means that you have ice spikes that spawn off of your Blizzard, and these ice spikes deal 15% increased damage to frozen enemies, which is awesome. In our offhand, we are using Conceited, which makes us deal more damage when we have a barrier active. We have barriers active almost, you know, the entire time. We get them from using ice armor, but we also get them, of course, from some of the choices that we made in the skill tree. On your offhand, I would say this might be your second most important slot, because again, here there are some important things that you want on the slot. This by far is not the best version of what I want. Ideally, what I would want on here is critical strike chance, lucky hit chance to restore a primary resource, and then something like resource generation or cooldown reduction would be great on here. But for now, all stats, critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, and chance to restore resource is good for me. And if you get something close to this approximately, you'll be fine as well. Our first ring slot is the class ring, and the reason why we use this is because this is going to give us a lot of additional damage based on how many elements we use. Now, if you're just using ice, fire, and lightning, that's a whopping 45% increase to damage that you can get if you have a perfectly rolled Telrash's Iridescent Loop. Now we're gonna have I'm gonna show you that through the vampire powers in season 2, you're able to get a 4th element rolling on this, which means we can stack it all the way up to 60%, which is fucking tight. Our second ring slot is X-Files, and X-Files is really good if you have any way to put dots onto enemies, because you have a lucky hit that comes from X-Files that says that your dots, your damage over time effects, have a 50% chance to erupt and just deal a huge amount of damage to the enemies around them. Now guess what, we have a dot, and that's the burn that comes from over here, our firebolt, and that basically has a chance to erupt the whole time and deal a lot of additional damage. So just a phenomenal double package here. And then in our next space here, we're using the exploiters aspect, and what this does is it gives us a 20% increased crowd control duration. We are crowd controlling the shit out of everything by, you know, chilling it and freezing it and stunning it and all of these things. So this is going to make those last longer. And it's also going to have the additional effect of having us deal additional damage to enemies that are unstoppable, aka big ass bosses. For our sockets, of course, on our armor itself, we are using rubies because we want the additional, you know, max HP, maximum life. And on our weapons, we're using the emeralds because we want additional damage to vulnerable enemies. And on your jewelry, you have two choices. You can either go with skulls to give yourself more armor, or you can go with the diamonds to give yourself more resistance to elements. The rule here is use diamonds until you are resistance capped, and then switch over to skulls. So in my case, I was using 3 diamonds before, but then eventually I had enough intelligence that I was resistance capped without using 3 diamonds. So I took 1 diamond off and replaced it with a skull. And so therefore I have 54% physical damage reduction on my armor, which is nice. And I got a fairly decent amount of maximum life. And of course, all my resistances are capped. Then just quickly running us through the rest of the stats here. So as mentioned, we start off with a critical strike chance of about 30%. Then of course, once Isu's activates, it adds on another 19 to 22% depending on how fast I'm moving on to you. We have a huge amount of critical strike damage, and we have some fairly decent elemental effects coming from here as well. Some other things that I'd like to call out as well is that we have then of course a maximum mana of 140, which is pretty nice. We have 30% mana cost reduction, and we have almost 17% mana regeneration, or rather generation. And we have a lucky hit chance bonus of 60%, which is kind of nutty and a little bit disgusting. On that, our lucky hit mana is then 36%, which is also pretty damn sweet. Last but certainly not least, I think we just need to cover the vampire powers. And in the case of here, what we are using is domination, which gives us additional damage to stunned, immobilized, frozen, or feared enemies. This is a no-brainer. We freeze enemies all the time, so this is an auto include for some nice additional damage. We're also using flowing veins, and this says that you deal 60% increased damage over time to enemies that are moving or affected by a vampiric curse. Now this is important because we also use, let me find it, we also use a cursed touch. Now this says that off of a lucky hit, there's a 44% chance to inflict vampiric curse on enemies. Afflicting enemies have a 50% chance to spread it to other enemies. So this is a great way for us to essentially get this curse, you know, sort of onto enemies, which means all of the enemies are vulnerable, and we deal additional damage to vulnerable as well as regenerate additional mana off of vulnerable. So you can see how the little engine essentially comes together. We also use Pray the Weak here, which means that we deal more damage against enemies that are vulnerable. So again, auto include right there. And then last but not least, this is kind of like the secret sauce that gets us our 4th element, and that is infection. So infection basically means that enemies now, when they are hit 8 times, they get, well, hitting enemies with direct damage affects them with pox. This gets the poison onto them. When they are hit 8 times, then it essentially explodes and deals this poison damage, which then is what activates your 4th element. Now, usually as you are blazing your way through a nightmare dungeon or something like that, you aren't going to see this 4th element activate because shit's going to be dying too fast for it to happen. But this really shines on tougher enemies like strong packs, bosses, and that sort of thing, where you will then usually see the 4th, damage, stack come from this, and then essentially you have 60% increased damage because of your class ring. And last but not least, before I let you go, I just want to talk a little bit about the rotation and how you should be playing this build. And I'm going to be having some footage running in the background as I try to illustrate what I'm talking about. But essentially the idea of this build is super straightforward, and that is that you are using Blizzard ahead of you to essentially, blanket the battlefield and force the enemies to run through them. you're using your defensive cooldowns to essentially stop any enemies that come through, but at the same time it allows you to play extremely aggressive. So what you can do is you can open with a teleport into a pack of enemies and then frost nova them, then pull a blizzard down on top of them, or you could be like a really cheeky fellow and put the blizzards down, then teleport into them, then frost nova, and then work your way from there. At the same time, you're also using, you know, lightning spear to like push into the enemies whenever it comes off of cooldown, and you're pretty much alternating between ice armor and flame shield to basically keep you alive and to also activate Tibalts. So generally it's a good idea to always have one of these two available to you. Don't have both of them off of cooldown, because then of course, well, not off of cooldown, sorry, don't have both of them on cooldown, meaning having been used, because that of course means that you have no defensive cantrips and you have no way to, you know, go like, oh shit, when something bad happens. Now, generally speaking, this build has no problem with shredding like nightmare dungeons all the way up to like 80, you know, 90, and only from about 90 to 100 you have to start playing, I would say, a little bit slower and sort of plan the way you create the choke points with Blizzard and everything like that. When it comes to using this build on bosses, it's even simpler, if I can put it that way, and that is the idea is that you just want to be dumping as many blizzards on top of a boss's head as you possibly can, thereby forcing the boss to eventually be stunned. And once the boss is stunned, you activate Tibalts and you just absolutely fucking decimate them. So this works on every single boss in the game, all the way from, you know, all of the side bosses and stuff past Duriel, all the way to, of course, Uber Lilith. And this allows you to skip a lot of mechanics that you would usually have to dodge, especially in the case of like, you know, Lilith. I generally with my builds, I want to make something that means that I don't have to do the mechanics on that fight, because I fucking hate the mechanics on that fight. And this build absolutely allows you to just sidestep all of that fuckery and just drive Lilith into the ground by stunning her, and then, you know, taking it from there. Naturally, because you're able to do that to Lilith, it means that you can do the same thing to any other boss in the game. And as long as you can essentially just dance around a little bit and play between using your flame shield and your ice armor to survive any potential, you know, damage that's coming your way, as soon as you get that stun going, you activate Tibalts with flame shield, and it's fucking off to the races. And that's it for the build. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. Let me know in the comments down below how you would change this, what you would do to sort of like make it better at whatever you're trying to do with it. This is a build that I've been having a lot of fun with. Of course, I play, I would say, ball lightning as a main, because this is what I used to do like boss carries and stuff like that when we stream the game together with the community. But this is a nice little alternative, and damn, oh damn, does this thing farm Helltides like a fucking animal. One of the reasons why I prefer this to ball lightning is because it is a lot easier to play than ball lightning. Don't get me wrong, ball lightning is fairly easy, but requires this whole thing of like spinning up and knowing when to use your cooldowns and all of that sort of stuff. Whereas this one is pretty much just blizzard, 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 take a sip from your beer, blizzard, 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 teleport, blizzard. And that is pretty damn easy to play and a hell of a lot of fun, which is two things that I absolutely enjoy in a build. So there you go. Good luck with the abattoir next week, and of course remember to check out this channel for streams that we do during the week. I stream on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. The one that you might be interested in is Tuesday nights, when we stream Diablo 4 with the community, and I do Uber carries for free, helping people to get Duriel done and dusted, and maybe get yourself one of those coveted uber unique items. So go on and come check that out if it sounds like something that you might enjoy. But other than that, just have a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Until next video, fucking cheers.